Today I will be talking to you about math literacy. There are a lot of different ways to read in math, all of which are extremely important. An especially important skill is to be able to read graphs and tables. These come up a lot in our everyday lives, so it's important to have a basic understanding of them. The example I'm going to show you is from an assessment from my 7th grade math class. The students had to be able to read this graph and look at the table to determine if the relationships are proportional. So on this assessment, they had to look at this graph and understand exactly what it means. On a graph, the x-axis is always the independent variable, which is what you're manipulating in the situation, and the y-axis is always the dependent variable. It's important to understand the relationship between the two axes because when you create a line, it can help you to see if it's proportional or not. For something to be proportional, it must start at the origin. In order for the student to know if it starts at the origin, they have to know what the origin is. The origin is the point on a graph that is 0, 0. If the student is unable to recognize this, they won't be able to tell if it is proportional or not. Another thing to tell if something is proportional is if the line is straight and if the ratios from each point go down to the same ratio. For example, this point here would be 5, 40. So I can put 5 over 40 over here. The next point I can see clearly is 10, 80. If you look at this closely, you can tell the relationship between these two is if you were to multiply the numerator by 2 and the denominator by 2, which means that each ratio can simplify to the next ratio, which shows that it's proportional. In order for the students to understand this, they need to be able to read the graph. Another thing the students need to do in order to tell if there is a proportional relationship or not is to be able to read the table on the right. They need to understand what column means what, as well as what each row means. The first column here is the independent variable, while the second column is the dependent variable. In order to read this table, you need to understand that for each independent variable, there is a result for the dependent variable. For example, when there are 0 t-shirts, you still have to pay $25. This means that if you were to graph this point, it would be 0, 25. We can use that, flip the table, to graph it over here, and we can tell right then that it does not start at the origin, which is the key to knowing if it is a proportional relationship or not. So based on this table, without even going to the graph, we can tell that 0 is not 0 in this case. So the point is not 0, 0. So we know that it is not a proportional relationship. Another way tables are used in this assessment are to fill in the answers to the questions. For example, they need to be able to read this table and understand that the questions will be on the left side, and depending on which company they are looking at, they will have to fill it in either in this column or in this column. If they are using value t's and more, they need to understand that this column is where they prove or explain their reasoning for if it is a proportional relationship or not. The only way they know how to do that is if they could read the table properly, and that is an integral part in this assignment because if they can't read the table and they don't understand what to put where, they could get the problem completely wrong, therefore giving themselves a 0 just because they didn't understand how to read the table. Now that was all in terms of this assessment. In order to simplify this to everyday life, we can take a look at the graph and try to understand what each point on the line means. So each point along this whole entire line correlates to a number of t-shirts and the total cost in dollars. So depending on how many t-shirts you get, the price is going to rise because it is a proportional relationship that is increasing. It is extremely important to be able to read a graph because you may only be given a graph in a certain situation. You need to be able to tell, oh, when I have 15 shirts, I'll have to pay $120. It's very important to read a graph because they are in newspapers, they are on the internet, and they are all over the place. And without being able to read it, you can just be extremely confused and take something the completely wrong way than what it actually is. So it's very important to be math literate, especially when it comes to reading graphs and tables.